welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. So I'm so freaking excited to be sharing this makeup look with you guys because this is in honor of the new movie release, Venom. Venom comes out today in theaters. I had a few previews yesterday, but it is nationwide today, and I'm so excited to have this makeup look dedicated to the movie. I knew I wanted to do this at the very end of the summer because I had gone into my old high school to work in the theater department, and when I went in, I was trying to gather some ideas for Halloween makeup, and one of the students said to me, "Why don't you do Venom?" And at first I was kind of like, whatever, and then I stopped, and I was like, I can do prosthetic. And so immediately I started brainstorming. For Venom makeup tutorials, you usually see him as a body paint or a mask, simply because for a prosthetic, that is really hard to translate and have a working piece on your face. You can easily do it with foam latex, but that is not something that I have accessible to make at my house. Usually for that, you do need a lab. Now, being that I haven't had to do a project this large before, at Cinema Makeup School, I did a prosthetics class, and I learned how to make foam latex prosthetics. I was definitely able to get used to using larger prosthetic pieces, but I've never had to make one in this style, where it's more of an at-home situation that anybody can do and you don't need to have a lab. Of course, I've made smaller prosthetics with latex and cotton balls, but this is so big, we needed to figure out something that was going to be workable. So I definitely reference Ellie Max Effects here on YouTube quite often for this, simply because she has a necromorph makeup tutorial where she has a descended jaw, and that was definitely a giant help for me in trying to figure out how I was going to shape Venom and how I was going to make him functionable. Like I said, I knew I wanted to do this at the end of summer, so I had about 2 months to try to prepare and figure out what I wanted to do, and I will let y'all know the biggest challenge for me was figuring out how I was going to do the eyes, because I wanted to be able to see through it. Like right now, I can see you guys, and this needed to be a breathable mask as well. This needed to be functional, because if it's a prosthetic, you need to be able to wear it successfully and not die. So this mask actually has a breathing hole under by the mouth. Hi guys, how you doing? I can breathe perfectly fine through my nose because I have the little space cut out right in front of my nose. It's right here, and I can also kind of see through it, so I can see you guys from here. Hello. And of course, I can see through this as well. Like I said, this was the biggest challenge because I needed to find a clear plastic that would fit well and that I could cut to its own shape, and a perfect fabric so that it looked white to you guys, but once again, I could still see through it. This is definitely one of my favorite projects I've done so far. I've absolutely loved the sculpting process, stressful as it can be at times. I'm just so freaking happy with how this turned out, and it is in perfect time for the new Venom movie. So once again, if you guys are interested in seeing how you can achieve this Venom prosthetic makeup in honor of the new Venom movie with the gorgeous Tom Hardy, then just keep watching.
Hey guys, so we are going to get started by prepping our teeth. I'm just going to be pouring some polymorph plastic into a bowl of boiling hot water and waiting for it to turn translucent. Once it turns translucent, you are able to finally mold with it, and I'm just going to be rolling it into a long log shape before slowly ripping it into 2 pieces and having them be tapered at a point on the end. Then you can kind of just mold it between your fingers until you get the desired tooth shape. This definitely took some practice for me just because I couldn't get the perfect shape. But the good thing with Venom is they don't have to be perfect. They can look a little jagged and uneven. So you're just going to keep going, and you can even take some scissors to add the point or sharpen it if you need to. Just something to keep in mind is the moment it turns opaque, you can no longer mold with it unless you put it back in the water to remelt it. This can be quite a time-consuming process, mostly just because you have to keep going back and forth to reboil the water, but you're going to end up with quite a few teeth, and it's really good to have more than you need, simply because you don't want to go into applying them into the prosthetic and not have enough, and you should definitely want to make sure to have them in different sizes as well. As you can see, I have some longer ones, and then I also have some teeny tiny ones that I can just squeeze into little places. Then we're going to be moving on to making the prosthetic. I'm just going to be taking some tin foil, making it into a semicircle, and applying that on the area around the nose and sticking it with some painter's tape just so we can use that as a reference point to make the jaw. I'm going to be trying to extend the jaw as long as possible just so we can look as creepy as possible. And we're going to be doing the exact same thing with the tongue, and we're actually just going to be keeping the tongue as is. We're not going to be really covering it with much just because I liked the simplicity of the foil and you don't want to make that too heavy. Once we're done figuring out the placement, we're going to be taking some petroleum jelly and just applying this all over the life cast head. This is going to make the removing process a lot easier and help the latex not tear when lifting the prosthetic from the life head. We're then going to be taking a hot glue gun and gluing down the foil. This is actually going to hold the foil temporarily, but the best part is whenever you're removing the prosthetic, the hot glue won't hold any resistance and you'll actually be able to lift it from the life cast without any problems. Now going back to the tongue, I'm actually going to be taking a Dixie cup and cutting it in half and applying that to the end of the tongue. We're also going to be cutting off the rim part of the Dixie cup just so it's easier to apply around the mouth area, and also cutting out another semicircle at the opposite end to help us breathe under the prosthetic. We're then going to be making latex paste, so I'm going to be taking some cheap latex I got from Walmart and some flour, mixing it together. The way I like to proportion it is I like to pour in a little bit of latex and then slowly scoop in some flour, making sure to stir as I go to get the best paste possible. I personally like the consistency of toothpaste, and you're just going to be applying this all over the foil, and then you want to just take some latex on your fingers to help smooth that out when needed. I personally love making latex paste. The only thing to keep in mind is for a prosthetic of this size, I went through about one entire bottle of the latex from Walmart. And the reason I recommend the Halloween latex at Walmart is simply because it's cheaper and I don't really care about how nice that is, simply because I'm using it to build a prosthetic as opposed to applying it straight to my face. I would prefer to save my Nigel's latex for just, any other occasion where latex is going directly on my face as opposed to making it into a prosthetic and mixing it with flour. Now for part of this, we're also going to be taking some cotton balls and mixing it with latex to kind of build up the other areas and make it look a little bit more rough without having to be afraid of the weight, which is actually where my downfall begins. So I wasn't thinking at all, and I was just going with the fact that I could just fill up cotton balls with latex and that wouldn't be heavy. That won't make my entire prosthetic collapse, which is exactly what happened. I was unintentionally soaking up cotton balls with latex and just piling them into the jaw piece until the jaw is literally being shoved off of the life cast, and I am left having a short mental breakdown.
16 paranoia-filled days later.
And then we're coming back better than ever. And trust me, I was still stressed out simply because this was just so annoying, but thankfully there was some saving grace in this. I got to keep the nose area and the tongue. So the only thing I had to replace was the jaw. So I'm just following the exact same steps as before. And I forgot to mention this before, but I'm actually taking duct tape and you're putting that on the very bottom of the jaw just so it has a covered base, and you're just going to be covering that with black later on. You honestly don't really even need to put any cotton balls or latex in it, because after that horror story, I'm afraid to touch cotton and latex again until later on. But anyways, I feel like this just worked a lot better. I was kind of able to perfect the areas that I maybe messed up on the first time, but thankfully I didn't have to completely restart. And something I recommend doing is to take a styrofoam cup and just gently place that under your chin piece to help lift it up. This is because no matter what, your flour and latex is going to be a little bit too heavy for your foil and hot glue, that it's going to start to weigh it down a little bit, but hopefully it won't break. But it's a comfort thing to have something under it, keeping it lifted and in the place that I want it. We're then going to be going back into our latex paste and just putting that over the nose area, because we're now going to begin by sticking in our teeth. So you're just going to one by one literally be shoving the teeth up there just so you can get that nice and natural looking ridge. And if you don't get that, you can always take a little bit extra latex paste and just put that over and kind of makeshift your own. And so I'm just going to be mixing up a bunch of long ones with the smaller ones, primarily in the back, because he does have a nice double layer of teeth in the reference photos, so I'm trying to mimic that as much as possible. Not gonna lie, I do wish, looking back, I'd put a few more teeth on the bottom row, because the top is just so crowded and I absolutely love it, so I do wish I had done that to the bottom as well. Next, we're going to be moving on to our forehead piece. I'm just going to be applying a thin layer of latex on the bottom and then slowly applying some cotton on top of that. This is just going to give the cotton balls something to stick to, and then you're going to go over that again with latex before building it up more with your latex paste. I kind of jumped back and forth between latex paste and cotton balls for this step, just to suit whatever needs. So mostly around the eye area, I'm using cotton balls just because I can really form that shape. And then around the head, I'm just building up with latex paste because we need that to be thick and round. I went ahead and let those dry overnight before coming back the next morning to work on the lips. So what we just did were the gums, and now we want to make it look even more realistic by adding his lips. So we're just going to be rolling out a jumbo cotton ball, laying some latex down, laying the jumbo cotton ball on over top of that, and once again layering that more with some latex before taking a spatula and pulling that away from the gums a little bit to really make it look like lips before doing the exact same thing to the upper lip as well. We're going to be moving over to the eyes, so I had already cut out my eye shape, so I'm just going to be using that as a reference and lightly marking on the prosthetic with a pencil to kind of get the area that we are going to be working around, because I don't intend to glue in the eyepiece at all. I just plan on placing it in there. If you're going to a cosplay or something, you might want to glue it in, but I want to be able to remove them if needed. Plus, I want to be able to see when I'm applying the makeup, and yes, I can see through them, but it does have a little bit of a white cast. And the other thing is I have a bunch of studio lights shining on me, so that makes it harder to see. Once I've figured out the placement, I'm going to be going back into my cotton and latex and just building that up around the area that we are going to have the eye, so it's going to be easy to just place the eye into or glue it in. We're going to be jumping on over to the tongue, and for this I'm just going to be taking some liquid latex on a brush and just applying that all over the foil. Something to keep in mind, one, if you do use a brush like I'm using, use a cheap one because you're likely going to ruin it, and two, I am doing this because it's going to make our paint job way easier, because if you apply any kind of paint on foil, it's not really going to dry, but if you apply it on latex, it's going to dry faster and it's just going to be easier in general. Next, we're going to be prepping for the paint job. You just want to take a piece of paper or something to cover up the lower piece of the jaw and like a rag to cover up the upper piece. You could of course take the teeth out, but I personally find that to be a little bit too time consuming, so this was just easy for me to do. And you're going to be spray painting your tongue. Now once again, it is going to dry a lot faster because you have the latex on the foil, because if you were to just spray paint the foil, it's going to take forever to dry. So this actually dried rather quickly, and then we're actually going to be going into some of our body paints. I'm going to start off by taking my Madalyn Paradise paint in orange and mixing that with some of my Graftobian Pro paint in tickled pink, and just creating a nice light peach shade similar to his in his reference photos, and just applying that all over the tongue. We're then going to be taking our Graftobian Pro paint in Fuzzy Bear Brown and applying that to the outer edges of the tongue to help add more dimension and darken some areas before going in with our Madalyn Paradise paint in white, and taking a chip brush, you're just going to splatter that over the tongue to kind of create a few taste buds. We're then going to be taking some Mod Podge on a sponge, and we're going to be applying that over the tongue to seal the paint. This is actually a fantastic step because it's going to dry glossy, so it's going to look nice and shiny like a tongue should. So you're just going to be laying down a rag and letting this dry while we move on to painting our bottom teeth. I'm going to be using some alcohol activated paints for this, so I'm going into my Skin Illustrator Flesh palette, taking Coral Adjuster and applying this all over the gum area. It's definitely better to start off a little bit more translucent and build up the color, as opposed to having it be too pigmented and then it looks unrealistic. Because the best thing about alcohol activated paints is it seeps into the skin or the prosthetic and makes it more sheer, and actually makes it look more realistic because it's buildable. I'm then going to be taking Midnight Brown and mixing it with some Prime Red and applying that to the lowest part of the gums to not only add some irritation, but to add a little bit more dimension as well before going in and adding highlights. I'm going to be taking Rice Paper in Natural 1 and lightly brushing this on top of the highest points of the gum prosthetic. At this point, your tongue is mostly dry, so we're just going to be switching up to the upper teeth and covering the bottom teeth with the piece of paper again. And I'm going to be doing the exact same thing, starting off with Coral Adjuster, applying that all over the gums, and going under the teeth to those bottom gums as well, before moving on to Midnight Brown and Prime Red, doing the exact same thing to add a little bit more dimension, and also add more highlights with our Natural 1 and Rice Paper. We're then going to be taking our Madalyn Paradise paint in black and begin to cover the rest of our prosthetic. So this is going to be a somewhat time-consuming process, but at least it's easy, and you just want to be careful whenever you get towards your painted areas so that you don't mess up the alcohol paint with the water-activated paint. And you're just going to be applying this all over the prosthetic, making sure to get into the inner part of the prosthetic that might be seen from the viewer. We're then going to be going into our Skin Illustrator FX alcohol activated paints, and we're going to be taking black and just applying this on the gums as well to kind of help blend that up into the lip area. We want to add a few highlights to our prosthetic, so we're going to be going into our Maryland Paradise paint in white and applying this mostly around the lips and the eye area, just so whenever the light catches the prosthetic, it's going to look a little bit more three-dimensional and have those natural looking highlights, because you don't want it to all be one tone. That is why adding dimension is so important to making prosthetic and just art in general. We're going to be going back into our alcohol activated palette, taking Midnight Brown and Prime Yellow and just lightly staining the teeth. You don't want this to be too intense. I mean, actually you could if you want your Venom to be a little bit more gross, but I just wanted to give it a nice light wash so it doesn't look pearly, but it looks a little bit more realistic and kind of like he looks in the reference photos. Now Venom is a sticky mess, so we want him to look like he's literally being pulled together. So I'm going to be taking a hot glue gun on some parchment paper and creating some thin strips of varying sizes before going in with some spray body paint. This is new, I found this at Walmart, and it's actually pretty helpful for situations like this. You're just going to lightly spray over it, and you're going to be taking some super glue and applying this to the edges and corners of the mouth to kind of look like those pieces that the corners of his mouth is actually being slowly melded and stitched together. We're then going to be going back into our Maryland Paradise paint in black, and we're just going to be applying this over the tongue just to kind of help blend it into the very back where it's a little bit darker. And one of our last steps for the prosthetic is we're going to be taking this polyacrylic paint and we're going to be applying a generous coat over the entire prosthetic. I started off painting it right over top of the black body paint before moving on to the teeth and the gums. Not only is this varnish going to make it look glossy and sleek, but it's also going to work as a sealer so that whenever we use water later on, it's not going to disrupt the body paint and make it leak or transfer whatsoever. So now I'm going to show you guys how to do the eyes. I got this faceless mask from Party City and I just went ahead and cut out these shapes. Honestly, I just freehanded this. I didn't even trace anything. I just went for it and then flipped it over to duplicate it to the exact size. And then I got this mesh from Joann's. I'm going to try to link a similar kind down below just because I don't have the product number and I wasn't able to find the exact one, but this one seems like it. So I just took some Mod Podge, applied that onto our little plastic topper, and then we're going to be just placing the fabric over top and letting that dry. We're then going to be cutting this out. So what I highly recommend is actually having the eye on the right side of the scissors, so that way you can get a nice and clean cut. And that is your completed Venom prosthetic. So now once we have finished that, we're going to be moving on to removing the prosthetic from the life cast. You're just going to be taking some baby powder and a brush, and not going to lie, this entire process took me 30 to 40 minutes simply because I was so terrified of this falling apart. You spend so much time working on this prosthetic, and to have it collapse one time before, I was a little traumatized. So just take your time with this to make sure that you don't rip or poke any holes into the latex. So you're going to start off by lifting up a corner, getting some baby powder under there, and then just slowly working your way around the rim of the prosthetic, continuing to apply more and more baby powder underneath until it starts to lift off. Now don't be afraid of getting baby powder on the prosthetic because once again, we use the polyacrylic as a sealer, so you don't have to worry about baby powder ruining the prosthetic because you spray water on it and it just goes away. So once the prosthetic is released from the life cast, you're just going to grip it from the edges and lift it off before readjusting it and just spraying the prosthetic with some water to get rid of the excess baby powder. We're also going to be spraying a little bit of that spray body paint into the inner part of the mouth as well, just to make sure that the gray tape is completely covered so it will blend in with our body paint. So the prosthetic itself took about 2.5 days to make, and by the time I got started at actually applying it on myself, I had just pulled an all-nighter, and it's 6:30 a.m., and we're gonna turn ourselves into Venom. It's quite an exciting experience, but I'm also incredibly sleep deprived at this time. We're going to be going back into our Vaseline and applying this into our eyebrows because we don't want to lose those. This is my holy grail piece. I don't want to lose my eyebrows. And we're also going to be applying them into our eyelashes as well before letting our hair down so we can slick it back and put some Vaseline in our hairline and over our skin as well, because trust me, it's going to hurt so much when your baby hairs are just ripped from your flesh. We're going to be going back into our Madalyn Paradise paint in black and just applying this all over our entire chest area, starting with our neck and bringing it down to our arms as well. I wasn't quite sure exactly where I wanted this to end, so I just honestly brought it down to basically around my elbow area. And now onto the face. You're going to be applying some black body paint around your eye area because you don't really need to put this all over your face, just the areas that you might be able to see through the prosthetic from certain angles. So I put it all around my mouth and my eyes, but you don't need to put it on your forehead because you're going to be putting on a bald cap. So I'm just taking this bald cap, putting it on before lifting it up so we can apply some spirit gum, letting it stick. And I didn't bother doing the back. I just went ahead and threw that into a ponytail in the back and just sprayed the entire bald cap with some of that spray body paint. We're then going to be using spirit gum to adhere the prosthetic to our face. Now, as you can see, I did try it with latex, and personally, I just don't think it's really that strong. I don't usually apply prosthetics with latex. I just feel like it's not a strong enough adhesive, but spirit gum, however, is. And so you're just going to start off by taking your prosthetic and applying it gently into the center of your face, making sure to slowly start adding pressure to make sure it's sticking, and then start adding pressure to the outer portion of your face to make sure that sticks. The reason you do this is because you want to make sure the center of the prosthetic sticks, because you can always add more adhesive to the outer edges because that is easier and more accessible. You're then going to be taking your spray body paint again and just spraying that over the edges of your prosthetic just to make it blend in with the bald cap. You can always build up the bald cap area with some latex and cotton balls, but I just didn't see that necessary for this look. Then we're going to be going into our Madalyn Paradise paint in white and creating some beautiful veins on the chest area like he has in all of his photos. And last but not least, it's time to put our eyes in their sockets. And that is the completed Venom look. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and share it if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos. Speaking of seeing more of my videos, for the month of October, I upload a new Halloween themed makeup look every weekday, and every Saturday I upload a Spoopy Saturday, which is basically just a conversational video where I get to connect with you guys a little bit more and take a break from all of the makeup tutorials. So anyways, with all that being said, let me know if you go see the Venom movie. I am so excited to see it. Thank you guys again for sticking around and watching this tutorial, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!
I give it 2 tongues up. They literally said that on an ad. I'm not that creative, I swear.